All right. So today I'm joined by, sorry, what's your name?
Uh, you could just call me my username Blackstar.
Blackstar. All right. So
Yeah.
today I'm going to be debating with Blackstar. And the proposition we're debating is whether or not global warming slash climate change poses a serious risk to the human race. So I'm going to be starting, and my position is that global warming and climate change, they are real, they are anthropogenic, they are caused by industrial activity, specifically the carbon emissions, as well as methane emissions. We have had about 1.5 degree of warming since industrialization, but that global warming does not constitute a very serious threat to the human race because we're very adaptive. The So far we've had, as I said, about 1.5 degrees of warming, and the impact on the human race has not been substantial. If you look at agricultural yields, including like ranching, like total farm output, I guess you could call it, it's on a straight trajectory upwards. So crop yields haven't really been affected on a global scale. And if you look at deaths from natural disasters, because one of the things that people say about climate change is that it makes natural disasters worse. Uh, Natural disasters killed a lot more people 100 years ago, even though the population of the Earth, in absolute terms, even though the population of the Earth was much smaller than they've killed in more recent times. It's gone down dramatically, and that, of course, not because the natural disasters have gotten less serious, but because now we have better housing materials, so we're more prepared. We also have satellites that can predict these things, warn people in advance to evacuate. So we've gotten a lot better at dealing with natural disasters. So the impact from natural disasters has been mitigated by human preparation, human technology, so far we've had 1.5 degrees. I don't think it's impacted the human race that much. So I don't see why another 1 or 2 degrees would be the end of the world. What do you think about that, Blackstar?
Hey, before I begin my statement, I just want to get a couple things out of the way just to make sure that the both of us aren't confused in a sense. Okay, so are we arguing the idea of climate change in its totality or climate change as in the warming of the earth? Because there are multiple formats of climate change: greenhouse gases, carbon emissions, air pollution, stuff like that.
Yeah, we're arguing climate change in its entirety, not simply global warming. That's a good point. No, we're arguing in its entirety. I did focus on the warming, but everything is open to as part of the debate.
All right, cool, cool. Okay, so that being out of the way, hello.
Yep,
Hope you
yep,
guys are doing all right.
yep.
Yeah. Um, so I'm on the side of arguing that climate change is actually a very serious thing, even though it does not look like it is causing a drastic amount of change in the environment. It is still something that needs to be taken care of, just because of the fact on see a large majority of people like from the stats that I'm going to pull up later on, because I don't usually like to bring up evidence in my opening arguments. Thousands of people dead due to climate issues, hundreds upon thousands of people suffering many ailments like asthma, cancer, and other forms of it due to the pollution inside of the air. Multiple continents severely suffering from the use of climate change and the use of manufactured goods like fracking and coal mining, and contributions of greenhouse gases and fossil fuels from cars, specifically China as a great example. One of the most air polluted places in the entire world. Almost 10,000 people have died in the past couple of years just because of air pollution alone. that number has probably skyrocketed since the year 2023. Um, it can lead to a lot of like it's not just the idea of like people dying is the issue because it is a very serious issue. The issue is if we were to leave climate change its own vices and allow people to not think it is a serious idea, and we also give the precedence for other world leaders to think of it as something that should not be taken care of automatically and immediately, which also gives other world leaders the precedence to use fossil fuels and other formats of greenhouse gases to ruin the ecosystem even more. Great example, Donald Trump trying to repeal a bunch of greenhouse gas laws and certain um what's the word restrictions for businesses so that way they can actually start making way more money in terms of like mass producing goods. So yeah, I think it should be taken more seriously as an issue. I don't think it should be like we all agree on the idea that it exists obviously, but like I don't think it's something that should just be thrown to the wayside.
All right, excellent. So we do agree that climate change is real, and I'd like to point out, I guess, or explain my position, which is that it's not that I don't think it's a problem at all. I do think it's something that should be like monitored, and we should take steps to prevent it, steps to reduce carbon emissions. I just don't think that it's like an existential threat. Okay. So I just want to clarify my position there because it is sort of nuanced. And like I think that first world countries like Canada, US, Europe, whatever, should and have been taking measures to reduce carbon emissions. I think that's like a good thing. I think that that should continue to the degree that it's continued. But I also think that there's a lot of countries in the world that are extremely poor. Half the world lives on less than $7 in income a day. They're struggling to make ends meet, and I think that it's important that those poor countries have use of fossil fuels as a way to power their economy and to rise out of poverty, just as we in the first world did. I think that it would be hypocritical for us to say to them, "You can't use this energy to get out of poverty. We did it, but too bad for you." So I think that there is a serious need for fossil fuels in poor countries for transportation, for power, for heating of homes, and and I do think that we should take measures to reduce carbon. I'm a fan of nuclear energy, for example, and I think that it was unfortunate that countries transitioned away from nuclear. I think that that's probably one of the optimal solutions. It's not very popular because there's a huge upfront investment, but in terms of emissions and reliable power, it's a great solution. But I think it's naive if some people say like we should just cut off carbon emissions immediately. I think that's much more dangerous than continuing to emit carbon, but making steps to transition away from it uh, as we can.
Okay. Um I agree with most of it except for 2 points. The one that you just said, like lastly, and then the one that you briefly mentioned in like the middle portion, talking about like lower income countries suffering from the lack of use of like fossil fuels, right? I'll start off on the end point first. Okay, so let's just set the record straight. I'm not trying to say that we should immediately move to eco-friendly energy because let's be honest, although we do have the money and theoretically it might work, technically speaking, there is no physical way that even some of the biggest countries in the world like the United States, China, Russia, France, um majority of Europe itself can be able to immediately switch to nuclear energy or to wind turbines or to water powered cars or stuff like that, right? What I'm trying to say is there is an incentive for a large majority of countries that might be able to use the idea that climate change isn't immediately affecting us to allow themselves to continue the use of mass climate change or mass fossil fuels or mass carbon production. Um, Certain companies like Exxon, Shell, um, a couple of other ones I know, Nestle is one of them, uh,
Nestle.
et cetera. Just the simple idea that like we shouldn't automatically try and figure out a solution kind of just gives the incentive to these companies to say, oh, so what we're doing right now should be perfectly fine because it's all going to work out in the end. We're eventually going to get to the point where we don't need this anymore, even though they're still considered one of the largest companies in the world, and the United States economy basically relies on them. So that's the first point. The second point with like poor countries not being able to deal with energy, there are hundreds of sources that can disprove that. But in 2021, the International Energy Agency was able to find that in developed countries and compromised, 54% of global renewable energy investment was found. Specifically, that there was a majority of energy supply growth through 2030 in Africa and Central and South America, and 42% of supply growth in China if they are to continue on the path that they are right now. All of those countries that I just named, South Africa, uh, Kenya was one of them, Nigeria was also one of them, and China, for example, all of them have been struggling for the past 10 years due to economical crises. But they have found themselves in the situation where using green energy has been able to help them get through that hole. The issue that you're trying to say, or what you're trying to say is, if we keep the use of if we keep the use of fossil fuels, it should be way cheaper and give these poor countries a chance to restabilitate themselves. What I'm saying is, if we don't allow these poor countries or give them any investment like these big countries should, or just allow them to explore the finance of green energy itself, then we will never see any progress. Because, as again, I do agree, if we were just to make the entire continent of Africa have to use wind turbines and water powered energy or water powered electricity immediately, like pass it as martial law, majority of those countries inside that continent are just going to wipe across the map. But that does not mean that we shouldn't allow them to start exploring those options quickly and allow them to start investing in it as if they don't have the money to.
All right. I'd like to transition slightly to talk about the dangers or lack thereof from climate change. So, one of the things that people talk about is rising sea levels. And to date, we've had about 8 inches of rise post industrialization. So, this really indicates to me that rising sea levels are not a huge threat if you consider even like another 2 feet of rise over the next 100 years, for example, that's not really going to pose many difficulties for the human race as a whole. Maybe you have to abandon some coastal cities or you have to do some mitigation like the Dutch have done, like they do in New Orleans, which is below sea level. But that's not really, a huge deal in the grand scheme of things, especially when you look at the time period that's going on. Most houses are torn down and rebuilt after 100 years anyway. So that's one thing. The rise. Another is the temperature rise. So we're coming out of what is colloquially referred to as an ice age. Technically speaking, we're still in an ice age because there's polar ice caps. That's like the technical definition of an ice age. But we're coming out of a glacial period that lasted from about 110, 120,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, to around 20,000 years ago was the coldest period. It was about 5 degrees colder than it is now, and then so we're coming out of that. And but if you look back historically, temperatures were a lot hotter Like, even as short a time period ago as 50 million years ago, temperatures were like 15 degrees C hotter than they are today. It's abnormal for the Earth to have polar ice caps. Most of the historical most of the through the history of the Earth, there have not been polar ice caps. Only about 25% of the time have there been polar ice caps. 70% of the time, there have been no glaciers, no polar ice caps. It was just like a hot Earth. That's the normal state of affairs. And as we transition over the last 20,000 years from the average temperature of -5, what it is today, to the temperatures it is today, the human race thrived with that change in climate, with that rise in temperature. It allowed us to expand throughout the world. So I just don't see an increase of 1 or 2 degrees from where we are today as posing much of a risk to the human race.
Okay. You know what? Okay. Let's just yeah, I'll just concede to the fact that like there are things that we can do to stop majority of the issues that I just spoke about. That's absolutely true. We as humanity have always been able to adapt to certain things, whether it be different climates, different temperatures, no matter how hot, how cold, etc., right? I'll agree with you on that. We can agree on that, right?
Right.
Right. Cool. Here's the issue that I have though. Specifically speaking, if we were to continue to adapt to something and it progressively got worse and worse, what do we have left, right? Like, we can't just say that inclusively, no, not inclusively, progressively fix ourselves when there's nothing left to fix. Now, this gets into the idea of how fast will it take for things to actually get worse, which is your argument. I say things are already bad as is. As I've already said, almost 1,300 people have died from climate change related issues, specifically due to things such as asthma, poor air quality in certain countries. Like stuff like that, that's a serious issue. And it poses the idea that the use of fossil fuels specifically should stop because even while the heating of the earth isn't that big of an issue, when we have human lives on the line being killed and being affected due to our poor negligence of how we use our fossil fuels and how we mine the earth for resources, that is a serious issue because essentially, as a government or as a people, we are neglecting our own and we are causing our own people to die for our selfish needs. That is the issue that I have right now. And the fact on how you essentially are saying that if it's not that bad, we can fix a couple homes. A couple of homes are going to be drowned or sunk due to the sea level, and we can just get them back in a couple hundred years. Who knows what's going to happen in a couple hundred years? As we've seen, things have progressively gotten worse year after year after year. Maybe not specifically temperature wise because of the argument that you made with the polar ice caps, but it has gotten worse in terms of air quality. It has gotten worse in terms of resources. It has gotten worse in terms of like temperatures. It has gotten worse in terms of like how much clean water we have in the world, etc., etc. Majority of life on Earth is not doing well, and it's because of our own self negligence. So, if we were to continue down this path, even on the argument of you saying that we can be able to contribute to this or fix it eventually because we can just adapt to it, there will be nothing to adapt to if we just go down that line of, oh, it's broken, let's just fix it, and then carry on it without getting rid of the thing that's breaking in the first place.
I definitely agree with you that air pollution is a serious problem that needs to be dealt with. And one of the things about new technology in general is that it tends to be cleaner. Before cars, people rode horses, which emitted their own pollution. Horses would defecate, and so
I know
cars,
methane gas.
even though they emit CO2 or whatever, they're actually cleaner than horses. And so you look at like countries like Canada, very developed, high tech countries, you don't have the issues with air pollution that you see in India and China. So that's just sort of naturally like as you become a wealthier country, as you become more technologically developed, you look at like Northern Europe, uh, all these very well countries, they don't really have the issues with pollution that you see in developing countries as much. So that's one of the things that sort of naturally gets fixed, and that's true of CO2 emissions as well. It was only 100 years ago that oil was just gunk in a farmer's field that sort of messed up the crops. So technology develops very quickly. And one of the reasons why I'm not concerned about climate change is long before increased CO2 emissions became like a real threat to turn Earth into Venus or whatever, I think we'll be on to the next technology that's newer and cleaner and greener. We're going to have better solutions, whatever they may be. But I agree that air pollution, pollution of the water, these are serious things that absolutely, you have to have no tolerance of. 100% agree with you on that. Uh, so
Yeah, sorry.
yeah, go
Good
ahead.
debate, by the way. I do have to head out now. Thank
All
you.
right, cool. Well, thank you very much. It was a quick debate, and I think well argued on both sides. So thank you so much for joining me, Blackstar.
No problem.
All right, bye.